I thought I would start off by discussing the difference between fun and interesting. Will become clear why. When I was a veterinarian, nobody ever asked me if I was having fun. When I was a consultant, agribusiness consultant, I never got asked if I was having fun. And when my brief period as a public servant even, career mistake, nobody ever asked me if I was having fun. And yet, as a senator, I am regularly asked, am I having fun? And my answer has always been, no, I don't think so. I feel a bit like the kids in that movie who ask their parents, are we having fun yet? The answer has always been, I don't think so. And then people look at me a bit strange. And I thought there might be something wrong with me. So I thought, maybe I am having fun, I don't realise it, or maybe I should be having fun and I'm doing something wrong. And so I asked Bob Day, people keep asking me, are you having fun? And I have to say, no, not really. Are you having fun, Bob? And he said, no, not really. I thought, well, that's a relief, but then maybe he and I are both abnormal. So I thought I'd better consult a bit more widely. So I know Malcolm Turnbull quite well. And so one day I was chatting to him and I said, people keep asking me if I'm having fun, and I really don't think I am. But you're way up the pay scale to me. You're a minister, a cabinet minister. You're much closer to God. Are you having fun? He said, well, when do we ever... This is a little bit vulgar. When do we ever have fun anyway, unless we're getting a root? And I thought, aha, that explains it, and I'm not. So just in future, if any of you ask me, are you having fun? And if I say yes, you'll know why. But I don't expect to say yes. On the other hand, interesting, that's different. Interesting has two definitions, as I'm sure you know. There's a normal definition, and there's also the Chinese curse definition, may you live in interesting times. I'm not entirely sure which one applies, but it's definitely interesting times. The last 6 months, as you know, I was a senator-elect for 9 months, and now I've been a real senator for 6 months. So the last 6 months have truly been a baptism of fire. Brand new senator. I thought I knew about politics, and I do know about politics, but I didn't know much about being a politician. All new staff. I chose not to hire any staff who had been in political office before. A government which I think probably would be safe to say is inept, certainly inept as far as its dealings with the Crossbench is concerned. Pretty inept at selling its policies, and we see the consequences today. We also have an opportunistic and obstructive opposition. Labor Party's just flat no to everything in the last 12 months. Greens never say anything else but no. It's understandable that they should be obstructive. Their attitude is that the Liberals were very obstructive when they were in government, and that's quite true. So they're just returning the favour. But it does make the environment difficult. But it has led to me and 7 other people being very much in the crosshairs from the point of view of legislation in the Senate. We have had the balance of power so many times because of the opposition of the Labor Party and the Greens to practically everything, including some proposals which they came up with when they were in government. And that balance of power that I share with the other crossbench includes some who are decidedly weird and absolutely inexperienced, and in several cases way out of their pay grade. So it's been an interesting baptism of fire, as I've said, and I think interesting is the right word. It was never my life's ambition to become a politician. I avoided being a candidate for a winnable position for many years. I could have put my hand up long before I finally did. And even then, getting elected in September 2013, I never really thought that would happen. I was pretty sure I'd get Gabe elected or one of the other guys elected in one of the other states. Getting myself elected wasn't really the primary target. But I got the job, and I'm making the best of it. My main motivation in getting involved in politics was seeing the need for change. Things have to be different. If you don't get involved, what can you do? Write filthy letters, and I get plenty of them, or throw rocks at the TV, which is very tempting at times. But there's a more constructive way, and that's get involved, join a political party, see if you can make a difference, and then if you don't do the preferences as well as you'd like, get elected. So that's what happened to me. One of the reasons why it needs to be seen as not a fun job is the hours are inhuman, especially in Canberra. Duncan, and I'll introduce Duncan and Gavin in a moment. They come with me to Canberra, and usually one of the other ones as well. The hours are filthy in Canberra. It's a 12, 14-hour day without fail. You are away from home a lot. If any of you have ever travelled much for business, you know that the first time you do it, it's great fun. The second time you think, okay, this is still all right. By the third time you think, God, how long is this going to last? It's not fun anymore. And I've been travelling for business most of my life, and it wasn't even fun the first week. So you're away a lot. I like sleeping in my own bed, and at the moment I am sharing a house with some other people. It reminds me of my student days. You've got to negotiate the bathroom and not leave a mess behind for other people, and work your way through the kitchen without upsetting what other people are trying to do and that sort of stuff. I haven't done that since I was a student. Probably the most relentless part of the job is the media. I imagine if I didn't have the balance of power or didn't share the balance of power, the media would probably leave me alone. It's quite likely that they wouldn't even know my name, but they do, and I do share the balance of power, and they are all over me. Barely a day goes by without the phone ringing at least a couple of times. For quite a long time, it was an average of 3 interviews a day. And an average of 3 interviews a day means once in a while there'll be a day where I don't get called, so obviously I get a lot more than 3 to bring the average up to 3 overall. On sitting days, it's relentless, and Gavin's in the thick of it, fielding those calls, trying to juggle it in between other responsibilities. I've gone from sort of looking at myself and cringing to thinking, okay, that's not too bad now. I'm probably my fiercest critic. And so when I see myself now on TV, watch myself, I think, okay, that's something I should improve, but overall, did I get the message across? Are people understanding what I'm trying to say? And even though it is a bit of an issue with, we're a party of ideas, a party of principles, I keep reminding my staff that I have to be attractive, if you like, in a political sense, to people who are not that politically engaged. The argument I use, or the case I use, is my 84-year-old mother. If my 84-year-old mother understands me, feels warm and fuzzy about me, doesn't really matter much what the principles are, she might vote for me if I don't say anything obnoxious. And that's the kind of image I have to portray. I have to be as well regarded, as lovable, if you like. Helen says, Australia's coolest old bloke. I have to be like Bob Brown without the policies. So lobbying, or being lobbied, is another part of the job. It's normal to get hundreds of emails a day telling me what I should vote on issues, how I should vote on issues, trying to influence my vote one way or another. Lots of emails and also letters in the mail from organisations, industry organisations, who think that sending a copy of their annual report to every senator and and presumably every House of Reps member is somehow good for their activities. I don't get it, but they think it is, and so they arrive in their dozens. People want to come and see me and tell me their point of view, and sometimes I see them, but sometimes I don't. There's a constant theme running through a lot of the communications too about money. You're only in this for yourself. I suppose for somebody earning, $40,000 or $50,000 a year, a politician's salary must seem huge, and it's understandable, I suppose, that they would take that view, that you're only in it for the money. But relative to having your own business, a lot of people get a lot more than that, a lot more than what politicians get. A lot of the journalists who interview me get paid a lot more than what politicians get. But it's an issue I have to deal with. And there's this perception also that really you're only in it to get the pension. There's still this perception that there is a very lucrative parliamentary pension after you leave office. The fact is that finished 10 years ago in 2004. There is no parliamentary pension, at least for federal politicians anymore. We get superannuation, we contribute to superannuation the same as everybody else does. That message doesn't seem to have got out there. So there is a huge amount of criticism of politicians based on the assumption that we're only in it for ourselves, and the pension, the assumed pension, is part of it. I get lots of people also wanting me to add my name to their cause, to contribute my influence to the extent that I've got any. And I'm pretty reluctant to do that sort of thing in most cases. It has to be a pretty outstanding issue before I'll get involved. I have 5 staff who work in the electorate office, 2 beautiful women and 3 ugly blokes. You met Roxanne on your way in, and you've met Helen already. The other 3 are Gavin. I think he was on the desk on the way in too. He's my media guy. Max. Max is senior advisor as well. And of course Duncan. Duncan has been a member of our national executive for a long time and was one of the founders of the LDP back in its early days. Decided we weren't going anywhere and wandered off and joined the Liberals, and then came back again and is now a very major contributor to my effectiveness in the Senate. The last 6 months, the 6 months in which I've been a senator, the government's focus has been on achieving its agenda, naturally enough, and of those, the ones where it's got anywhere is the carbon tax repeal, the mining tax repeal, the introduction of TPVs, all of which I supported, although I had to hold my nose pretty much on the mining tax one because it also included some reversals of tax concessions and benefits and so forth, which would mean people paying more tax. I didn't like that, but it was a tax repeal as well. So on balance, I decided to support it. The direct action on climate change, which was a steaming pile, and Bob Day and I got ambushed on that. They lined up Nick Xenophon and John Madigan, and they had the pups on board, and they got that one through. We didn't even see that one coming. Their higher education reforms got blocked. Christopher Pyne is nothing if not determined, so we'll be having another go at that. In fact, I've got a meeting with him tomorrow afternoon if he's not engrossed in leadership discussions. He's really is quite good in his heart of hearts. It's just that compromise tends to undo a lot of good intentions. He wants to deregulate higher education. I quite agree with that. But he also wants to save the budget. And they really are 2 separate measures. In fact, they shouldn't have even been put together in the budget as 2 separate measures. One is a structural reform, and the other one is a budget saving measure. But they've been added together, conflated, to the point where Pyne is now negotiating with John Madigan and Nick Xenophon, for example, which will result in taxpayers saving a lot less money and maybe none at all in exchange for deregulation of the sector. which seems to me to be a very poor trade-off. So I decided that I wasn't going to go along with that, so I put a stake in the ground and said, well, if that's the way it's going to be, then I won't support it now. So we've got some interesting times coming up on that, but the government is pretty determined to proceed with that one, although I guess it will depend if Tony Abbott and Christopher Pyne are still running the show or whether there's a change after Tuesday. One of the big issues, big disappointments with this government, apart from the fact that its budget was pretty limp, has been the national security legislation. It's just obnoxious and so unnecessary. We've lost freedom of speech, yet more freedom of speech. The freedom of the press has been infringed. If the metadata issue gets up, there will be this presumption that we're all criminals in waiting and we need to be spied upon, so the evidence is there when we inevitably transgress. It's just obnoxious. It offends all my liberal principles. The government should be our servant. We shouldn't be watched by the government. We should be watching the government. It's just all around the wrong way. The thing is, the metadata issue was knocked back by Labor. The Attorney General's Department was pushing it quite hard when Labor was in power, and Labor wouldn't have a bar of it. I've discussed this at length with Mark Dreyfus. He doesn't like it. And the question will be whether Mark Dreyfus's view, which is to oppose it, influences Bill Shorten, and Labor ends up opposing it. So far, with national security legislation, Labor has laid down and let it go through. And sometimes I've had a bit of buyer's remorse afterwards, saying, gee, really, did we really vote for that? That 35p of the ASIO Act. They woke up after the effect saying, we might have gone a bit far, but too late by then. This national security legislation is offensive, and it's also ineffective. There is absolutely no evidence that it will help catch Islamist terrorists. None at all. In fact, there's a very good chance it'll make it more difficult to catch them. They'll have so much data, they won't be able to analyse it. It would be far more effective if they just targeted the people that they suspected are likely to become terrorists, the people who evinced some sympathy for ISIS and perhaps are displaying violent tendencies or sentiments or something like that. They might miss the odd one, but they'll miss them anyway with the metadata if they collect on everyone. And of course there's aspects of privacy of our own data. Who's going to store it? Where's it going to be stored? How much is it going to cost us? What are the chances that it'll be hacked? All that sort of stuff. You can imagine using your smartphone, standing in the street, ringing somebody up, and you're outside an abortion clinic or a brothel or anything that you might not want to be associated with. That metadata tells you when you made that phone call or when you did that internet search, where you were when you made it. And all kinds of conclusions can be made. It's very, very bad idea, and I'm very fearful that we won't stop it. If Labor rolls over on it, and they've got the backbone of a jellyfish on this issue, on these issues generally so far, there's a very good chance that it'll go through, and it doesn't matter how much screaming and yelling I do about it, won't make any difference, and I will do a lot of screaming and yelling about it. I have done a fair bit already. The other issue that's occupied a fair bit of the government's time has been the FOFA regulations. The Labor Party had two goes at disallowing the FOFA regulations. FOFA is Future Financial Advice. There's this perception that somehow or other the government's change in those regulations will lead to financial advisors not being responsible enough, not being accountable enough for the consequences of the advice they're giving, receiving commissions, all that sort of stuff. There's a huge amount of misinformation and lack of understanding around the issue. I'm satisfied that the government's wind back of Labor's regulations would create an acceptable balance. At the end of the day, if the financial advisors are tied up in knots too tightly, and that's the situation with Labor's regulations, nobody could afford their advice. They would have to go through such hoops to provide that advice that they have to charge thousands of dollars in fees, and the people who most need the advice wouldn't be able to afford it. So I was perfectly happy to support the government and vote against the disallowance. Twice Labor put it up, twice it was a really close vote, and then Sam Dastyari, clever bugger he is, a very clever bugger, got a couple of the crossbench to change sides on the issue, change their position, pulled on an urgency motion, won it, pulled on a disallowance, won it, and so the regulations got disallowed. So something's going to happen there too. And so they've sort of been the government's main preoccupations. We invariably get a long list of legislation that the government thinks it's going to bring on in the Senate, and it's about 6 or 8 bills, and sometimes they'll have a dozen bills for the week. I think next week there's a good dozen bills listed for consideration. We'll be lucky if we consider 2 or 3 of them. The only ones that you can be sure will get up will be the uncontroversial ones, the ones that Labor and the Greens and also support. And we don't always support them ourselves, and I have several times made a very pointed speech about why this supposedly uncontroversial legislation is not uncontroversial at all, but it's dreadful. But my vote by itself is not enough. Nobody else seems to take an interest in some of these things. My relationships with the government senators has been very good. On average, they are all very nice people, and it's been very constructive. My relationship with Matthias Cormann, for example, has been especially good. He's a nice guy, a small government, low-tax person. We get on very well. He's quite a decent guy. Quite a lot of sympathy for my point of view, although he's a very, very loyal government man. And in public, he will back the government to a fault, even though you know jolly well his personal view is completely different. I am so glad I'm not in that situation. Mostly I get on well with the government senators. I'd have to say George Brandis is probably the most difficult of them all, but a lot of people find George a bit difficult. The opposition senators, government, by and large, they're okay. They think I vote with the government all the time, which is not true. My voting average is about 70% with the government. But at an individual level, I get on pretty well with them. One thing to remember about Labor senators is they're nearly all there due to union backing. You don't get pre-selected for a Senate position without union backing. So pretty much all of them have got a union background of some description. It's important to understand that. That doesn't mean they're all a bunch of lefties, bleeding hearts and so on. In fact, quite a few of them are very hard-nosed, practical blue-collar unionist type people. And Joe Bullock, senator from Western Australia, he's a very pro-capitalist, pro-market, free-trading unionist, and a good guy, nice fellow into the bargain, and very smart underneath that bluff exterior. The Greens, on the other hand, there's probably only about half of them I even bother to talk to. Bob Day's really funny. We sit across the chamber, just across the aisle from the Greens, and Bob Day says, I feel like I need a shower after I sit next to these guys. He hates them. I don't. I can deal with most of them. There's 1 or 2 of them there that I'd rather not deal with, but there's not very much common ground. Occasionally I'll support their motions if it's a call for documents or something, but most of the time I oppose their motions, their bills and so forth. There are a couple of areas where we've worked with them. One is the assisted suicide bill of Richard Di Natale's. I'm supportive of that. I'm interested to see how it goes. I think it will fail, and I think he's relying on constitutional head of power which doesn't exist. So, I'll let that run for a little while, and it may be that at some stage I'll have my own go on that issue. Medical marijuana, I co-sponsored Richard Di Natale's bill on that. I'm not a great fan of the medical marijuana approach to marijuana legalisation. I think it has the potential to create bureaucracies and vested interests and all that sort of stuff, when the best approach really would be just allow recreational use, like they've done in 4 states in America, and then the medical marijuana can just piggyback on that. That would create a much freer, easier market, I think. But it's important to be symbolically correct in some of these cases, so I co-sponsored that bill. And of course, on the metadata issue, the leader on the one leading the charge against that from the Greens' perspective is Scott Ludlam. There are many issues where I don't agree with Scott Ludlam, but at least on this issue we have some common ground. So we've been working together at various times. Now I'm fairly careful to ensure that it's only the metadata issue on which I am agreeing with the Greens. I don't really want to be dragged into that camp, if you like. And it's also, I take great care to ensure that I'm opposing it on libertarian grounds, not on some of the grounds that those guys like to raise. But, and I mean, they often distinguish between big government and big corporations, for example. And they think big corporations are far worse than big government. And so I want to stay well away from their perspective. The other crossbenchers, a mixed lot. Bob Day and I get on very well. He's a decent guy, same age as me, business background. We have a lot in common, except he's socially very conservative. He keeps saying to me, we need to ensure and we need to convince the government that we need more LDP and family first senators in the Senate instead of the ratbags that are there now. And I think that's right. But I keep saying to Bob, if more LDP senators were elected, they would have the same views as me. And I think that's right. I think we would ensure that was right by pre-selecting people we knew were believers in our values. I don't think that's true of Family First. Family First has one set of views, Bob Day has another set of views, and they only overlap in certain areas. So getting more Family First senators into Parliament would not necessarily result in more Bob Days. And so I am a bit worried about that. I've told Bob I am a little bit worried about that. He understands my concerns, but I'm not sure what's going to happen from it. I thought I might just run through a few of what I would regard as achievements in the 6 months that I've been there. It's sometimes difficult to get the word out that something's been achieved, and I think the main game, as I've said on previous occasions, isn't what I achieve in the Parliament. The main game is to convince voters out there to elect more LDP senators, I think, and also state parliamentarians, of course. We have to get more people into Parliament. It's not good enough just to have me there. So that's the big game, that's the big picture, that's what I'm aiming for overall. And if I achieve very little in Parliament, but I achieved that at the next election, more senators, I'd still regard that as quite successful. But I have had some successes in Parliament, and I'll just run through them. In the carbon tax repeal legislation, there was one bill which reversed a tax cut. This came up in the first week, and it was absolute trial by fire. There was the government bringing up its carbon tax repeal bills. I barely remembered how to get from the chamber back to my office, let alone how everything was working in the Senate. It really was hard going. But what I had identified is that one of the bundle of 8 bills was reversing a tax cut. And I thought, OK, I can't vote for that. That's a tax increase. I had to get advice from the clerk as to how to split that bill off because they were going to go through as a bundle. I got advice. I had to jump to my feet, get the call, and have that bill split off and voted on separately. I managed to do that. It got voted on separately. I told Bob Day what it was all about. We crossed the floor and it went down. It didn't get repealed, so the tax cut stayed. So we retained that. One of the nicest moments I had after that was, after we'd done that, the vote there was a division on it, the vote result was announced. Scott Ludlam, who's actually pretty good on procedure, leaned across and said, "David, what was that all about?" And I was able to say to him, "We just voted to retain a tax cut." Ah, right. I'm sure if he'd known, that vote might not have occurred. Some of you might have heard that I moved a disallowance motion on some levies, in agricultural levies. My background is in agriculture. that caused quite a fuss and annoyed an awful lot of people. To mollify me, the government said, well, let's have a Senate inquiry into levies. So I said, yes, all right, that's a reasonable compromise. So that was established as a result of my needling, and that levies inquiry is now getting close to the end. There's one more day of hearings to go in WA in a couple of weeks. There will all absolutely certainly be recommendations for substantial reform of the levy system with much higher accountability to levy payers emerging from that. No senator who's on that committee would now say the current system is fine and doesn't need any attention. So that's quite progress. You're probably aware of the torture issue in the context of the national security legislation. There was the law was going to create a carve-out for ASIO agents to engage in criminal activity and be immune from prosecution. The legislation was not going to allow them to kill anyone or cause serious injury, sexual assault and so forth, but there was no exemption for torture. And of course you can torture people in various ways that don't leave them seriously injured. And it was a major concern. It was raised with me by Robin Speed from the Rule of Law Institute. I initially didn't believe it, and then I looked into it. The more I looked into it, the more I thought he's got a point here. This does give a licence to ASIO to torture, certain types of torture, and we don't want that. If there's one thing that a Libertarian can't tolerate, it's the government having a power to torture people. So I started jumping up about it. The more I jumped up about it, the more George Brandis basically told me I was a silly little boy and to go away, and made me angry, and went on and on and on. And eventually I sort of took the nuclear option, which I had hoped I wouldn't have to do. I threatened to withdraw all support for the government. Well, that seemed to do the trick. I went on Sky News in the morning and made that and said that. By 11:30 that afternoon, that morning, George came on and said, we are going to amend our bill to include torture as things that ASIO agents can't get exemption for. So we won that one, except that it should never have arisen, and I should never have had to use the nuclear option. The Malabar Rifle Range is another win. Thankfully, the relevant minister is Matthias Cormann, with probably the guy with whom I have the best relationship on the front bench. It comes under his portfolio, and I said to him, you could sell this land for billions of dollars. The shooters will leave. They're happy to leave as long as they've got somewhere else to go and it's paid for. And I can help you do that. He was really interested. And so we negotiated a broad agreement and made an announcement and so forth, and then it got into the paper that the government was going to sell off Malabar, and Tony Abbott did one of his knee-jerks and said, oh no, we'd never do that. So I don't know where that deal ends, but it will end up. But there is a deal to fund the Rifle Association and all the rifle clubs to move to new facilities somewhere else and have a permanent home. I had visitors come from, people come and see me about wind farms. I am really opposed to subsidies of wind farms. I know there are many people who are affected by or claim to be affected by the noise, and I'm sympathetic to that too. I'm also aware that the wind farm generators tend to be exceptionally obnoxious and very litigious. So I didn't have much sympathy for the wind farm companies, but I didn't really want to get involved in this. There's a whole lobby group around that area. But these people came to see me, and they were telling me what they'd been going through and how nothing was happening. Nothing was happening. I was also aware of the fact that Senator John Madigan, had been asking questions in the chamber about it, and nothing had been happening. And I thought, well, maybe we should shine some light on it via an inquiry. Then we thought, well, we don't want a normal inquiry because normal standing committees that normally conduct Senate inquiries are dominated by Labor and the opposition. The crossbenchers aren't even formal members of these committees with votes. We can't have that. So it had to be a select committee. A select committee is specially established just for a purpose. There's not very many of them established. So we had meetings and we lobbied and we got support from both the Crossbench, and also I got one of the government senators to co-sponsor a motion, put it up, and it got up by one vote. We won by one vote. It was a division. It was very, very close. Government opposed us. No, government supported us. Labor and the Greens opposed. And the inquiry is established. I'm not too fussed about whether I'm directly involved in all the hearings. John Madigan is obsessed by this issue. Bob Day feels very, very strongly about it. That's probably enough. I will attend some of the hearings. I think the key thing is that the hearing has been established. It would not have been established if I hadn't said, the hell with it, let's just do it. Let's press ahead and do it. We've taken a bit of an interest in the tourism industry. The Productivity Commission didn't have enough work and had initiated its own inquiry into the tourism industry. It was a fairly timid affair. The Productivity Commission doesn't like to create waves for the government off its own initiative. It only likes to look at controversial stuff with a reference from the government. So the tourism doesn't have a minister anymore. They feel a bit friendless, so we took an interest in them. And the suggestion was, well, maybe the Productivity Commission could look closer at some of the issues that are concerning the tourism sector. So we managed we put up some alternative terms of reference, suggested to the Treasurer that maybe he should endorse them so that the Productivity Commission wouldn't feel as if they were intruding on government toes, and that's happened. So the Productivity Commission is looking at the tourism sector. I'm pretty convinced, I have a fair amount of faith in the Productivity Commission. I'm pretty convinced that the outcome will be some serious recommendations which will help the tourism sector. I'm working on the assumption that there's only three things that Australia is naturally good at. One is minerals and energy, minerals in general. Another one is agriculture, and the third is tourism. And we absolutely have to get them right. We can be good in other areas, but we have natural advantages in those three. And if the tourism sector is saying we're stuffing it up, that's got to be taken into account. When Scott Morrison's an interesting guy. He's quite a hardhead. When I first started talking to him about TPVs, the information flow was all one way, and I had a few suggestions for him, and the ears were closed. He was just, I want you to vote for my bill, and I want you to vote for my bill, and did you hear me? I want you to vote for my bill. That's more or less how the discussion went. Pleasant enough, but that's about the sum total of it. As it got closer and closer and closer to the bill actually coming to a vote, it's amazing the change that occurred. All of a sudden it was, let's talk about some details, you know. And eventually I said to him, what have I got to do to get you to take our ideas seriously? And it was almost, it was a switch from no to, all right, I better listen to the bugger. So he did. He swapped from no, I just want your vote, to, all right, what have I got to do to get your vote? As a result of those discussions and the more amenable approach that he took, we got an increase in the humanitarian intake, the refugee intake. We got work rights for everybody, all the people on TPVs, chefs, which was going to happen anyway, and bridging visas. It was just appalling that they weren't allowed to work, and it also saves money, because if they get a job and they pay tax, they're not on welfare, saves all the rest of us money as well. So that was a progress, but the big one was our immigration policy, our LDP immigration policy, is based on a tariff. People paying a price, coming to Australia. If they pay the price, they get into Australia, and we don't look too closely at what their backgrounds are. If they pay the price, they're in. Our current policy, Australia's current policy, is a quota-based system. We want to let in a certain number, and then when you apply all these criteria to them, they've got to get so many points and all that kind of thing. Gary Becker has long said the way to deal with immigration issues and challenges of too many people wanting to come in and how do you discriminate between them and all that sort of stuff is put a price on it, more or less sell permanent residence. Gary Becker is now dead, but he recommended that for America with its huge immigration problem. He also recommended it to the UK with its many immigrants coming in. Our immigration policy, the LDP's immigration policy, is based on that idea, and I couldn't get Scott Morrison to even think about it up until he needed my vote really badly. And now, not only did he think about it, we have a Productivity Commission inquiry into it. So I think the Productivity Commission will come back and say, there's quite a lot to recommend this, and it may be that we will get taken seriously. And of course, the same-sex marriage bill, put that up. It's created a lot of noise. It gave me a chance to tell my dirty dentist joke about not hurting each other. When Tony Abbott said he wasn't going to even allow a conscience vote, I think there will be a conscience vote in the party room in due course, but I don't think the numbers are there for it to pass, even with a conscience vote. It'll take a while. But just getting a conscience vote in the coalition party room will be massive progress. And it may take another 2 or 3 or 4 years or whatever for it to pass, even with a conscience vote, but I think it will pass. But it is absolutely back on the agenda, and the nice thing about it is I've stolen it off the lefties. It is no longer a Greens bleeding heart issue. It is about the government not telling you who you should marry, what the gender of the person you should marry. It is not about discrimination or equality or any of that stuff. It's just get the government out of your life. I've also upset a few in the LGBTI, have I got that right? Yeah. Community, because I've introduced a provision that exempts marriage celebrants from an obligation to marry people if they don't want to, unless they are employed by the government. So in other words, you can discriminate as much as you like, except the government can't discriminate. And that's upset a few of them too, because they view this as a discrimination issue. I'm saying it's a freedom issue, it's a libertarian issue, and so discrimination in that context is okay. And then finally, in terms of sort of achievements, and I hesitate to put it up as an achievement, you probably will have seen the photo of the division that I called on the middle class welfare bill. It's very rare for private senators' bills to get voted on. But we put up this bill to reduce middle class welfare, which was to cut out family tax benefit A for people earning more than $90,000. Duncan did all the hard work. You have to write the bill. It was very brief, explanatory memorandum and so forth, and we put it in. We got every Thursday we get private senators' time. It was my allocation on, I think it was the last Thursday of the sitting week in December. I did a deal with Matthias Cormann that the government would facilitate a vote on it. I said I don't want it to just get talked out, because that's their normal approach to all the private sector stuff, just talk it out until time runs out. I'd like it to bring it to a vote. As I said, I have a very good relationship with Matthias, and he actually said, look, I wish we could support this, but it has to go through our processes, the party room and so forth, so we can't. So that's all right, let's just help me bring it to a division just so I can make a point. He had a good laugh at that and said, yes, all right. So I won't go into the details of how I organised that, but in the end, I had Bob Day teed up. You have to have 2 voices to call a division. So when the President says, I think the noes have it, and I yelled out, no, the ayes have it. Bob yelled out, the ayes have it. So that's the 2 voices. Division required, ring the bells, and so the bells go off. So Bob Day goes over to the no side, and I stayed on the yes side. I was the only one there, and then we got a photo of it. If you haven't seen it, get in touch with my office. We'll show you it. It was quite amazing. It'll end up in Odgers, they tell me. It was, and I even moved my normal seat, I moved into the centre of the chamber. I was the only one sitting there all by myself, and everybody else was over on the other side, all voting to retain middle-class welfare. It was just a symbolic statement. So, back to big picture stuff. The government is potentially a one-term government if they don't fix this leadership situation that they're in now, either by Abbott changing his spots, which I think is unlikely, but not impossible, but unlikely, or they change horse with somebody who's more appealing to the electorate. There'll be a one-term government. We've seen that in Victoria, we saw that in Queensland. We could see it nationally as well. It is all Abbott's doing. He has many failings, and he's a nice enough fella. He's not a bastard like Kevin Rudd was, but he has many failings. So it could be we'll have a one-term government, then we'll get dear old Bill Shorten. Dear old Bill Shorten would probably be even worse than Kevin Rudd. So they're likely to be a one-term government as well. So we could have quite an interesting few years. There is a problem developing in Australia too, in that I think there is a reluctance to reform. There's a reluctance to change. There's a reluctance to admit that things are not going to stay good for a long time, and that we can keep spending more than we're bringing in, and that it's not a problem, that some sort of magic pudding will emerge. I suppose it's understandable because we did have a fantastic decade as a result of proceeds from the mining boom. Those days are over, and they were abnormal, and there is now a reluctance to acknowledge that things can't continue the way they have been. It's no different from Greece. Austerity, we don't like austerity. We're going to vote against it. You can just vote to say, well, we can live beyond our means if we want to. We'll just vote that way. That kind of thinking is relatively common here in Australia as well. It's obviously also very common in much of Europe and America as well. America is getting pulled out of it because of that deal the Congress did with President Obama to settle the budget issue, where they went for some really tough budget savings, never expecting that they would actually implement them, because they thought they would agree on a budget and would render it redundant, and they never did. So they got implemented anyway. And that's the only thing that's really saving their budget a little bit, plus growth in their economy, of course, is helping. But even then, they've still got a massive deficit, massive debt, and they're going to be paying off their problems for decades to come. And then finally, getting back to the LDP, the next election, we must win more Senate seats. Will they change the voting system before then, the Senate voting system? They'd love to. They would love to. The only reason they're not having a go at it is because they think that Labor might not support them, or even if Labor supports them, they might so piss off the 8 of us crossbench that they'd never get our support on anything ever again. If they have a go, it will be just before the next election. It'll be quite late in the Parliament, when losing our votes might not matter to them. Mind you, if they win the election and we hold the balance of power, again, they'll have some very angry crossbenchers, and they know that one too. We had a go in the South Australian election. You'll hear more about that this afternoon. We had a go at the South Australian election before I actually took up my seat. It's pretty obvious that even the fact that I'd done an awful lot of media at that time did no good whatsoever. We ran a little bit with my name, a little bit with our principles, didn't cut through. We did terrible. It was a bit better in Victoria. We did much better, and we would have won a seat there if our preference deals had been better. So maybe we're starting to show signs of life there. Whether it was me or whether it was the issues we ran on, we don't really know. I think a bit of both. We missed out on the Queensland election because we weren't registered in time. It came on too soon. We must not miss out on any more. We must get registered in Queensland. New South Wales is a battle to get our name on the ballot paper. We are in the process of attempting to change the name of the Outdoor Recreation Party to Liberal Democratic Party so that it can run as that in the New South Wales election in March. We're up to our third lot of lawyers at the moment, and frankly, I don't think our chances of success are high. But if we won it, if we won that battle, we would win a seat. If we run us out the Recreation Party, we're highly unlikely to win a seat. Western Australia, we could win a seat over there. All we need to do is to get organised and get registered. We could win a seat over there. It's a preference game. The other states, Tassie, Northern Territory and the ACT, we're still nowhere. So we're a long way to go. One lonely senator can't do it all. I expect each and every one of you to do as much work as I'm doing and help us get there. Thanks very much.
We do still have a minute or two up our sleeves before we break for morning tea. So if anybody has a question they'd like to put to David, feel free to. We've got.
I've got a question. David, just in terms of media, you say they call you all the time, but if you had a broader strategy that you could share with the group in terms of how you sought to engage with the media, who you choose to engage with the media, who you choose not to engage with, do you have a broad strategy about how you work with them to get the message out to our media?
Well, yes, I guess so. There's two rules. One is don't allow yourself to be made an idiot, so avoiding the project, at least for a while, until they understood that I was onto them and ridicule was not going to be allowed. So that was sort of the first thing, and I wouldn't be interviewed by Waleed Ali on ABC and things like that, because he's a impossible bastard. And so avoiding, I made one or two mistakes, but largely avoiding traps where I could come out looking really bad or being ridiculed was important, especially in the early days. Not long after July, there was a tendency to regard all 8 of us as complete morons and to laugh at us a lot. I had a couple of conversations with journalists and in which I said to them, I don't think there's any point me talking to you. All you want to do is ridicule me. I said, I don't need that. So, you go and write your story and you don't need to talk to me. Well, there was a fairly rapid climb down from that. Oh, no. And the idea of not being able to talk to me for 6 years because I thought that they were a dickhead, that's a bit... They can't do their job properly if that happens, so they have to be careful, especially the gallery journalists. So avoiding negatives is probably the top. And looking for good opportunities to get the message across. We've had this discussion relatively recently in terms of, how are we going to reach Australians outside the political in-group, if you like, the political junkies, the poor silly fools who watch Q&A, for example. I refuse to go on Q&A. People who watch Q&A, they need therapy, quite frankly. And they're not our audience. I mean, they're the political insiders. So how do we get into the mainstream has been the main concern. Op-eds has been a main way of controlling the message and getting out there. If I could do the Today Show and morning TV and so forth, a different one every week, I'd rather that than 3 op-eds, to be honest. Op-eds go so far, and they do help define what I stand for and what the LDP is all about and all that sort of stuff. But morning TV, daytime TV, reaching the mums and the dads, getting on the evening news, large numbers of Australians only get their information from TV news. That's way more important in numbers games. At the end of the day, as I said, leave aside the politics, I need to be as well known and loved as Bob Brown.
We'll take one more and then we'll head off some...
Yes, thank you, David.
It's inside view. Insider gets a question.
Well,
he can ask me any time.
Question that some of us have been asking or wanting to ask. When you mentioned that you seem to be getting on well with several of the Liberal Party in government. And as an aside, I've been starting to get a trickle of emails in the lead up to the New South Wales election saying, they like what you've been doing, they've been a member of the Liberal Party, or they're still a member of the Liberal Party, and they want to know a little bit more about our policy on, clarification on assisted suicide, or want to know a bit more information on legalising marijuana. Do you see any softening of the Liberal Party's approach to us as we overlap on some policies that maybe will help them, or do you see the Liberal Party as seeing us as tapping into some segment of their constituency that may be libertarian?
Yeah, the Liberal Party.
Friends or enemies?
Yeah. Could you turn on the aircon, please? It's getting hot in here. The Liberal Party, God. There's no one Liberal Party. There's a Liberal Party in every state, and the political wing and the organisational wing seem to run on different agendas. They love me in the Senate. The Liberal Party loves me in the Senate because I've supported them on some of their more controversial bills, and I've got no sympathy for the Greens. Nick Xenophon, for example, he votes for the Greens 40-odd% of the time. I won't do that. And and they know where I'm coming from. There are many, well, not many, but there are a good number of Liberal senators who really wish the Liberal Party was like the LDP, or at least, more like it. So there's a reservoir of sympathy amongst Liberal politicians towards me and the LDP. But when it comes to politics, competing for votes, there seems to be a whole different attitude. We're their enemy because we've got Liberal in our name. We're a serious threat to them. We should be wiped out. And the pressure is really on. They're taking us to the AAT over the change in our abbreviation, and they're challenging the whole basis on which our name was approved. They are really unfriendly when we try to register. They objected in very strong terms with lies and everything in Victoria when we sought registration down there. So that they'll tell all sorts of lies and be very mean to us. And then when it comes time for preferences, they'll ring up and totally unashamedly say, we need your preferences. So the fact is I don't like them very much. I just like some of their members. I do like some of their members, but I don't like them as a party at all. And I don't think there is any prospect, in the short term at least, of some sort of rapprochement. I think they are fierce competitors, and they see us as a serious nuisance, and we're going to have to watch ourselves.